Hey everyone, it's Zach with Palantir Research. You will never look at Palantir's balance sheet the same way after today's video. This metric rose 25% sequentially this quarter for Palantir, and also this is at the peak for this value. And historically, this is extremely high for them. So don't worry, this is very positive news though. But no one talks about this metric or discusses it too deeply, even though it is very useful for investors. So I'm really excited to share this with everyone. And it also just goes to show when going through Palantir's latest earnings, there are metrics that no one talks about, making it ever more important for investors to do their own due diligence to get as much information as possible extracted every quarter, because this will help gauge the outlook of a company's future earnings and how easy or difficult it might be for them to hit targets, as well as showing the health of the company today. And honestly, these are just hidden in plain sight. But now you'll know to look for these in every earnings release, and it'll only take a couple seconds. So what is this mysterious metric? Well, it's deferred revenue. This isn't widely talked about, and for most people who don't deal with accounting, I wouldn't expect you to understand the mechanics of this, so I'll take some time to explain it here since it'll show you why it's important. For those who don't know, this is a line item that lives on the balance sheet on the liability side. So when a company like Palantir has especially large customers, there are large contracts where they receive payment up front for services, but Palantir hasn't necessarily completed all the work for that, so technically it can't be counted as revenue officially yet on their income statement. So how does accounting take care of this discrepancy of cash added to their balance sheet but doesn't actually flow to revenue? Well, it ends up on that liability side I mentioned that's owed, because first, you don't want to overinflate your revenue you haven't earned yet, even though the money's already in your account. And also, what if something terrible goes wrong? That liability is already quote unquote owed on your balance sheet, so for as an easy example, if that revenue never gets recognized, but a refund is needed because the relationship goes south, or the contract just needs to be terminated, or anything of that scenario, revenue won't be affected in that case of just terminating services not provided yet, because when the money is given back, to offset the decrease of your balance sheet assets, you would take it away from this deferred revenue account instead of needing to revise your revenue. So Palantir wants to recognize this revenue. And it's not a bad thing that services haven't been provided yet to recognize revenue, as with any company, this could just be the outcomes of the payment structure or timing of contracts, and maybe even preference for companies. If you think about it, this liability ends up becoming an asset on the customer's end if you think about it, like paying your rent ahead of time. It's like a deferred expense where you technically paid ahead, but each time you'll recognize rent truly being expensed from this account and slowly decrease your asset of prepaid rent, so it all balances out in the end. So here's Palantir's deferred revenue over time for the most recent quarters, and after, I'll let you know what this means for Palantir. As you can see in recent history, this has lived within a range of the high 100 millions to low 200 millions. In 2021 Q4, it reached a peak of around 227 million, but dropped all the way back down in 2022 Q4 to $183 million. But just recently, for the latest earnings in 2023 Q1, it jumped 25% or $46 million sequentially from the last quarter to $229 million. So this is historically at an all-time high and also the fastest rate that it grew historically. So this is actually good because as a ratio of revenue, you don't want too much to be deferred because it might show you're unable to fulfill your customers' contracts in a timely manner, which is an issue. And hitting a peak of 229 million when this is a higher quarterly revenue is very good compared to that 227 million peak in 2021 Q4 because their revenue was much smaller. You'll see it was 52.63% of revenue at the time of that 2021 Q4 peak, while it's down significantly to 43.7%. So naturally, deferred revenue will most likely grow with revenue, so you want to really look at this ratio instead. Granted, you keep the payment structure the same. But what does this all mean for Palantir? 3 big reasons. So first, if you have a product people are willing to be paid for ahead of time, that shows trust and confidence that services will be delivered. Some industries and businesses, it's the opposite, right? With a restaurant, this is probably a silly example, but being the simplest, you get the goods and experience first, and then you pay after. Of course, the time frame is basically instantaneously, but for a few minutes, you could technically say the restaurant is loaning the food to the customers with the expectations they'll get paid at the end, even though it's not necessarily guaranteed. Second, this is basically guaranteed revenue in the future as long as Palantir executes and fulfills their obligations. and seeing this grow the fastest between quarters is encouraging for those reasons above. But third and most importantly, it is a good canary in the coal mine if you see this being depleted very quickly after a good quarter of revenue. Then you could see that they manipulated the books to get their net income higher at the expense of depleting their balance sheet without actually doing a better job of getting new customers and growing revenue organically. So showing this huge jump now in deferred revenue, while revenue also grew past expectation, means Palantir didn't have to pull any accounting tricks to get this done, and they truly did a good job this quarter. But let me know your thoughts below on deferred revenue, and if you just learned about this metric. I know that not a lot of people really look into this or even talk about it, but I'll see you in the next video.